Welcome, everyone, to another fantastic episode of Double Booked. Today on the show, I'm joined by a reporter of chaos, a weaver of myths, the master of the written word, and his stories hit harder than a mead filled berserker at a midsummer brawl. He brews beers, teaches judo, and even arm wrestle Odin once just for fun. I'm talking about the author of the Spear of the Gods series, the myth maker himself, Gregory Amato. How's
Wow,
it going, Greg?
it's going pretty well because I don't think I'm ever going to beat that sort of intro that you just gave. For the record, the beating of Odin in the arm wrestling was actually for money and not just for fun.
Just for bragging rights?
Yeah, no, I wanted his cash. He has tons.
That's so funny. So let's jump in. For those that aren't familiar with your work, could you go through and introduce yourself and introduce your stories?
Sure. So I'm Gregory Amato. I am an indie author as of 2023 when I started publishing my first stuff. First one was the novella The Scald. That is right by Josh's ear on the bookshelf. You can see it right there. Yep. Nice. Thank you, Josh. That was the first thing I published. That's like a prequel story to the series Spear of the Gods. Spear of the Gods, the 3-book series. Burden of Bear is the first one. That is on the shelf right above The Scald. Again, thank you for replacement, Josh. Very well, very nicely done. Rune to Ruin was book 2. And oh, look at that. It's the no look. Yes. And Fallen to Fury is currently being kickstarted. That's book 3. That's going to finish the trilogy. What I'm calling the Spear of the Gods saga, and that is about a young man, not too young a man. He's 20 years old, so it's and not really a young adult, but there is a strong coming of age theme to it. The important thing is that this man is coming up in just before the Viking Age in a realm where the myths, magic, and monsters of the Viking Age are real. So this is straight Norse fantasy. It's not like Norse inspired where like you have trolls and you've got guys with big axes, but you know, the mythology is different. Or no, this is the myths, the sagas, the heroes straight out of all that stuff. I try to keep it very faithful. I also try to keep it culturally and technologically historical insofar as I don't want to take people out of the fantasy. So I'm willing to have dragons and magic swords that cut through rock as easily as they cut through cloth, but you will not hear me describe a window on a mead hall because that would be ridiculous. That's the series. Fallen to Fury is going to finish things off, and but I think that's a long enough intro. Did I miss anything, Josh? Do I need to hit anything other? Yeah.
No, that was perfect. So, what got you into writing in the first place? What led you to going, hey, I want to start writing?
You know, I've always been a writer ever since I was in school. I really didn't know a lot about structuring fiction. I didn't get any teaching or didn't really learn anything in school formally about writing stories. It was all nonfiction, which I liked to some extent. But when I started writing fiction, I think that was 2007, 2008, where I really put it down. And those were the first words that came through that would later become Spear of the Gods, where I created most of the core characters there. I love the adventures. I love the craft of writing. I've been writing my whole life. Like every aspect of my different jobs, my different careers has involved writing. So when I was, I eventually had a career with the FBI as an intelligence analyst, and I was writing intelligence. So like raw intelligence, which is like just the facts. And then you have the finished intelligence, which is, the not thoughts and opinions, but it's more like, okay, here is this broken down. Here is what I expect to happen. Here is what I think is the truth. Here is evidence of that, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a little bit more complicated than that. It's another style, but, journalism writing, academic writing, intelligence writing, other kinds of writing, they're all different. They use different style sets. They have different rules, expectations associated with them. I kind of like figuring those out and getting good at them. Fiction, writing novels, I will say, probably the hardest. And so it's no surprise there, to me at least, that this took the longest to get going.
So, from your perspective, because your first work was The Scald, how has your writing differed or changed from that to the most recent work?
Well, right now, the most recent work was so long that I wanted to trim 50,000 words from the draft to give you a sense of, I'm like, okay, I just went at this and I got it done. But, some of the connecting material was like, I'm almost there. I'm not quite, not advocating anybody use the system I use for writing novels, by the way. If what you call my system could be called a system. How has it changed since like The Scald and Burden to Bear? I think that I've, as you write, you learn writing, and there's been a lot of writing since then. I've also made a conscious effort to try to get better at the craft as I'm going, which I don't think will ever end. I don't think that really good fiction writers ever really stop that. But a couple things I could point out. And these are straight lessons from Michael J. Sullivan, who I met in the Arlington Writers Group in 2008 and continues to tutor or mentor some of us younger writers now. And one is to say things with fewer words. Don't repeat yourself. As I go through, I see more clearly, more easily, here is an extraneous sentence. It says basically the same thing as the previous sentence in kind of a different way. I was going for tone, but the thing is, 2 sentences there slows down the action. So kill one of those sentences or rewrite as a synthesis of the two. And the other is, and this is a very Mike Sullivan thing, clarity over cleverness. And I came from, AP English, study those classics, love all that, great stuff that came way in the past. And it's so formal. There's a lot of passive voice. There's a lot of, there's actually a lot, it's closer to old epic fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, some of the others. But I'd like to actually hit on later how fantasy writing has changed. I've kind of changed my style to be more in line with the modern stuff. And that is just like, you can be clever, but don't lose the reader. Never lose the reader. And like, don't be so enamored of like showing that you are clever to other people, because that cleverness will only be recognized probably by other writers and a few people in the know. And you're like, you're up in the trees here where there's only a few people. There's a lot more people at the ground level. Those are the people who want to hear this story. So keep them along and just do that well. That's really what good writing is to me.
Yeah, just keeping people engaged with the story you want to go through and tell. You mentioned something, and I'm curious about it. Was there a moment, a book, a movie, or just an experience that made you go, yes, this is the genre I want to go through and write?
I don't think, actually maybe there was. I don't think we're always aware of our influences. So I think I had some kind of like swirling in the background. But the time when I started writing the first words for what would become Spear of the Gods was for National Novel Writing Month. And I just sat down, and what I had just read was like 5 volumes of Robert E. Howard's collected works. So three on Conan, 1 on Cull, 1 on Bran Morn, and I think there's actually 1 other that is not coming to me, but just a lot of sword and sorcery. And these are all Solomon Kane. Solomon Kane is the other one. Very interesting character. Those are some of his earliest stories. And what they boil down to is you have either a wandering Puritan with a sword and flintlocks, or you have a wandering barbarian, like who's super barbaric, and that's Cull. Or you have a wandering barbarian who's maybe gets a little bit more thoughtful, and you can see Howard's writing style has developed a little bit more, and that's Conan. And you have a not wandering, but a king of the Picts who's trying to hold his people together, but has to wander around and figure out some problems there, and that's Bron Morn. And so I thought, well, this is awesome, but wouldn't it be more interesting to have a wandering wizard, which is kind of anathema to the sword and sorcery dogma, I guess, because magic is supposed to be at best, this mysterious thing, and usually pretty negative, probably evil, probably something that the barbarian has to overcome. But I was like, I don't care. None of that matters to me. This is what I want. And what I think is, like, the wandering wizard has like so many different ways to solve problems and so many different things he can get into. And so I started writing that. And then it almost immediately changed, because as you write, as I write, the creative process really starts coming out. And whatever I've planned, it'll never be exactly the way that I thought it would be. What it became in this case, especially because I was just throwing words down, I didn't know what I was doing. What came out was somebody with some magical ability, but he was telling me all these stories. And what stories was he telling? Well, he was telling the stories I knew. And these were from Norse mythology, because I knew these stories from decades ago, and I knew them very well. So what I decided to lean into was like, well, this isn't a wandering wizard. This is more of a bard character. And in Norse mythology, that would be a skald. So I was like, well, is he really wandering? I mean, who does he hook up with? And he hooks up with a crew. And very soon I had a bunch of interesting characters. Again, I had no idea what I was doing with structure. And I soon painted myself into a corner where I was like, I have no idea where they're going right now. And I stopped for a while because, this was it's good to get a first attempt out, but I really didn't know where I was going. And so neither did the characters. But later, I did know what I was doing. And I had a more cohesive, coherent sort of worldview and more of a through line for the plot. And I could see, like, I think I needed a trilogy. And like, yeah, actually, this story is a trilogy. This isn't going to be told in one book. I don't know what I was thinking. And yeah, I was not really thinking that much because I didn't know. And mistakes will be made. And that's how we learn. So yeah, that's me as far as developing things, and also partly me kind of rambling my way through an answer to the point where I can't actually remember what the question exactly was. So I hope I answered it.
No, you did good. You did good. I do have a follow-up question for you, but I do want to say, hey, we have some cool people that jumped on. We have Mark. How's it going, buddy? And then we have Ted. Sweet picture, Ted. That's a new one. I haven't seen that one. I'm trying to be cool like you, Ted. One of these days, I'm gonna have a
very
cool,
small picture, but I think that's a very good beard. Got to shout out.
It's a good beard. It is a good beard. So you mentioned something. I'm really curious because you mentioned multiple sources that inspired you, maybe unconsciously, but then you're starting to go through and think about it, like, hey, these types of work, like Conan, really inspired me. And I'm really curious, how do you go through and balance staying true to those source materials versus reinventing it yourself?
Yeah, so the mythology, the Norse myths and the sagas are effectively my source material.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you go back and you're like, but hey, the Danish line of kings and Skjold and like, no, actually, I mean, maybe, but actually I'm working mostly from the Poetic Edda, primarily. The Prose Edda, there's a little bit of stuff in the Prose Edda that's not in the Poetic Edda. There's a lot of mythology and sagas, the legendary sagas in particular, and that's where you get the heroes like Hrolf Kraki and Arrow Odd and a few others. You also get some pretty good villains. And if you're writing a book that involves people and not just gods, as far as this mythology goes, you really need to be familiar with those sagas, because there's so much awesome stuff in there. Mm-hmm. And there's so much stuff that that you will recognize even if you haven't even if you're not familiar with Norse mythology, if you've read like Lord of the Rings and you start reading Norse anything, mythology, sagas, whatever, you're going to be like, hey, that's a lot like Lord of the Rings. And yes, that is a lot like Lord of the Rings, because that is exactly what Tolkien was drawing on for inspiration, largely, was Norse and Finnish mythology. So when I'm doing this, it's really important. So first of all, there's some style considerations, and then there are some informational considerations. Stylistically, I don't start with plots. I start with characters, and that's just how I go, at least right now. So when I'm thinking about, since I've thought about this mythology for so long, what I started with was I was starting to think about personalities of these gods. We have limited information about a lot of them. We have different interpretations of the myths. We have maybe side information. Some of them you can guess at a bit. I feel very comfortable in my interpretations of Odin and Heimdall and Thor. I mean, they're Thor and Odin, very well explained, very, very well understood. I think modern media does not appear to understand that Odin is not sleepy nice grandpa. He's quite the opposite. But that's whatever. Heimdall, a lot less information. Then you get down to gods that get like one mention, and you get a couple of kennings like Ullr. And we hear he's good to call on in duels, and he's the god of the shield, and something about skiing and archery. There's some overlap with Skadi there, but there's no stories with Ullr that survive. So when I have a chance, or when I have a sense of personalities, I think, well, what would these personalities do given different situations? Because I'm going to put them in different situations than the myths and sagas have. This is ultimately like, it draws inspiration from all this stuff, including like Beowulf, you'll see very prominently in Burden to Bear, but it's not an exact retelling, and it is not me, and it is me saying like, hey, this is how this stuff really happened. It all just got really confused over like 1,000 years or so. And I want to keep it believable as that this could have actually been the way the stories were, but they changed over the oral tradition. They changed from writing to writing, which was much later than the oral tradition. Some of the choices I make are like, or some of the decisions are, for example, the presentation of berserks. And this is like hey, this is correct. Not like, this is how I want to do it. Like you can show them a few different ways, but the idea that berserk here were elite warriors in some, idealized army, it's like, no, generally they're bullies. They're kind of asshole bullies. They beat up on weak people, and they get killed. They're usually 12 of them, and they usually get killed by a singular hero who just goes through all of them. In many of the cases, there are some exceptions, but some of the presentations there, I'm like, no, listen, this is more how it is. Some choices are like, all right, this translation says one thing, and this translation says another thing, and I'm making a choice. I'm making a choice for this translation. A good example is we've got the saga of Hervor and Haedrek, which is really Tyrfing's saga. I mean, this saga is all about this magic cursed sword that does a lot of bad, terrible things to people. So let's be real. This is Tyrfing's saga. And the example here is we've got 3 manuscripts. I think they're H, U, and R. And I can't remember which is which, but 2 of the manuscripts agree that when Haedrek kills his brother Angantyr II in this case, it's because he stomped off and he got mad and he picked up a rock and then he threw it into the mist and it randomly hit his brother in the head and killed him. The other version talks more about the sword being involved. Now, just quick intro to this sword. This sword is stolen from some very skilled dwarves, and they don't appreciate it. So they curse the thing pretty thoroughly as the guy walks away. Now, generations later, Hadrek's mother, Herivor, gives him the sword. So he's like, haha, I've got the sword. I'm not even the firstborn. Ha 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 ha. Mommy's favorite. What happens is he goes off walking with his brother Angantyr, and he's like, I have to show him. Like, the thing is that if you draw this sword, one of the rules is it has to take a life, and it can't be put back in the sheath unless there's warm blood on it. So he's just like, I have to show him, pulls the sword, shows it to him, and he's like, oh, there's no one else around. And so he has to kill his brother Angantyr, for which he is outlawed. Now, the two manuscripts with the rock killing, they're, I think, generally considered to be maybe closer to an original manuscript. But I made a conscious decision, like, nope, I'm using the other one because it's a way better story. Are you kidding me? Throwing a rock randomly into the mist, like, no. The other one involves the sword. It involves a tragic decision. It makes you think about the mindset, like, did he mean to do that? Because the text won't tell you that. The sagas have very, very little as far as what this person's motivation was, certainly what this person was feeling, or any kind of inner thought. So there's a lot I could do with that. But I did have to make that conscious decision, like, nope, I want that version. And so, I wasn't going to rewrite the whole thing because, like, it turns out that Herivor just killed Angantyr because she didn't like him as much, to make it like, no, don't do stuff like that. There's no reason for that. You can just tell there's plenty of options within the story that make complete sense, that are attested. And, so I think it's important that an author have some respect for that source material. And the respect, in my opinion, means you know what you're talking about. When you diverge from something or you make a decision, you're making a divergence, why you're making that decision. So I can justify all of those things. Maybe not everybody would like those decisions, but I know the why of it. And when I read mythology-based fiction, usually, fantasy, I'm looking to see if the author knows the same kind of thing. Does the author really know the source material? Are they really doing this from a sense of passion? Because if it's not, and it's done more because, like, well, Vikings are hot, I can tell that pretty fast. And it goes to how deep the fiction is, and how good the story is, and how well formed the characters are pretty often. Two authors, I think, do this really well. Scott Oden did this in the Grimnir trilogy, Grimnir trilogy. Well, there's 3 books, and it's definitely Grimnir. Also pretty interesting because the protagonist is an orc. So, you don't hear that every day. But he's like one of the very few authors who mentions lesser known Norse mythology stuff, like the Landvatir, just spirits of the land. It's like, this was like part of that world, but almost none of the historical fiction that I see mentions them. It's like, well, probably because it's a fantasy element. And Scott Oden really got that fantasy element. The other is Genevieve Gornichek, who her first book was The Witch's Heart, which I read. It's not even really my style because it's kind of a romance focused book, or not focused, but romance is a big part of it. And it doesn't involve humans. It involves just gods. But she's kind of retelling a lot of myths, but with a through line that is different. And it was, even though I hate stories about Loki, kind of my nemesis, I'm a Heimdall guy, and Loki figures prominently and not such a bad guy, Gornichek, it was pretty clear she knew what she was doing. And she was doing something that did upend a few expectations, but it wasn't like God of War, like everything is reversed, the gods are evil, and the Yonar are just trying to get by. So I think that was a really good example and worth looking at, even if, you're like me and you focus usually on more action oriented books.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that was The Witch's Heart. The Witch's Heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
The first one was The Witch's Heart. I haven't read her second book yet, but I'll eventually get to that. It's the never ending TBR list, which I'm pretty sure you're familiar with.
I finished 1 and 5 books pop up behind it. It is what it is. So you mentioned something, and I'm really curious to dive a little bit deeper in this, or just getting your thoughts on it, since you really know a lot about the Norse mythology extensively. Has there been, when you were writing Spear of the Gods, was there a scene or an idea that you ended up scraping because it didn't feel authentic enough to the tone or the mythical roots?
I don't think I scraped anything because of that. Everything is definitely pretty closely aligned to that sort of worldview.
Mm-hmm.
I did scrape entire scenes because I was like, this is just not necessarily for the through line of the plot. It's a nice to have. And it's like, this book's already a little longer than I wanted. And this subject just doesn't come up again. I think I get that because of the character focus. And it's like, yeah, this is an interesting and important thing for the character. And it's like, well, but is it for the story?
Mm-hmm.
Because people aren't really picking up the book because like your character is so interesting. They want a story. They will stay if the character is interesting. But the plot line has to be there, and it has to be fairly clean, I think. I'm trying to think if there's anything I dumped because it was like, oh, whoops, I made a mistake there. I might have erased it from my memory. I bet you I did one of those. And, I'll mention it if it comes to me later on, if that's all right.
Yeah. All right. So Ted has a question before I jump to mine. I think this is a great question. So he said he stepped away to make a sandwich. I hope it was a good sandwich, Ted. Hope it was a good sandwich. So he's wondering why you chose Norse over some other culture and mythologies.
Okay. So first of all, Ted has reminded me of the answer to your previous question, and I will answer both.
On it, Ted. Good job, Ted.
The thing I scrapped was Ansgar gets to, the crew gets to a port town, and there's a lot of commerce, and he's just like, I think you remember from our last discussion, I'm a big food guy.
Mm-hmm.
So is my main character, and the first thing Ansgar does is he runs into town and he buys a loaf of bread, and then he goes and finds like a smoked mackerel, and he's like saws the bread in half and shoves the mackerel in there, and he makes a sandwich like Ted is doing right now. And I didn't scrap it because a sandwich was necessarily anachronistic, although yes, a sandwich would probably be anachronistic. I did scrape it because the whole scene wasn't really necessary. And, sometimes I go off on those tangents a little bit where I'm like, my connecting material is not quite as solid in between chapters or scenes. And something like that comes up. And so, yeah, he made a sandwich. But as far as why Norse, well, that goes back to high school when we were reading Greek mythology, of course, because that's what you read in your advanced English literature. Greek mythology is so important to literature, especially high literature. And I just wasn't that interested. Like it was okay. But I had heard a little bit about Norse mythology, and being someone who is often interested in lesser known things and in esoteric lore, I was like, is there an Ovid's Metamorphoses for Norse myths? And I had a really good teacher in high school. And he said, no, but here's what you should read. And you can get a copy of the Prose Edda. This was a long time ago when did not have as many copies of the Prose Edda in translation, But he also recommended Kevin Crossley Holland's The Norse Myths, which is, I would still recommend for certain people. I don't think it's necessary if you want to make like a serious study of the stuff and take a look at the original source material. Crossley Holland takes these stories and he chops them up, and he's like, here you go, here's this story. And he's drawing from all sorts of sources. So there's some prose edda stuff in there. There's some definitely poetic edda stuff in there. And he also provides you a glossary. The other thing besides a glossary, because a lot of these words are pretty unfamiliar, is he gives good footnotes and good endnotes rather, explaining a lot of the myths. And so it's written in a very accessible style. The endnotes are very accessible if you want to go on. And so for high school Greg Amato, this was perfect. This was the accessibility level that I needed, but could then chew on and get more out of and move on to more complicated books. Meanwhile, I could just read the stories and enjoy them. And so from there, I just went to the other source materials, the actual like translations of the prose edda, the poetic edda, reading sagas, reading books about the history of Vikings and the Viking Age to get a sense of culture and what we do know and what we might know. Just other things. And it expanded from there because I never really stopped being interested in all that stuff. Then when I realized what a connection there was between Norse myths and Lord of the Rings, which I've always loved, it was only more interesting from there. And so just building on interest after interest after interest, I never stopped reading. And I think that's why those stories started coming out when I started writing freeform, because that's the stuff I read so much of.
Perfect. Got another friend that jumped in. How's it going, buddy? So glad you're here. All right, so I'm curious because you said you're a character person first, so you create your characters and then go through and put them in situations for a plot. When you were writing Spear of the Gods, what was your approach with planning this whole series? Did you know the ending from the beginning, or were you figuring out as you go along within the characters?
So I knew one aspect of the beginning, of the end. The ultimate thing that Ansgar would have to do, and other things developed from there. You asked what my general approach was. My general approach was bad, which is why I took such a long time between 2007 and then 2023. Now there were a lot of years where I just didn't touch it because I was focused on my FBI career, but not knowing how to structure all of that was a big delay in all of that. I did know the basic end. I did know the ultimate conclusion as far as Ansgar's development. But as far as some of the other events, no. Some of those developed much later. And I can't say a whole lot more without major spoilers.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Yeah,
we don't want that. So pivoting then, how do you personally balance readers' expectations versus how you want to go through and tell the story that you want to go through and tell?
Oh, readers are just going to have to go for the ride.
They just deal with it?
Yeah. No, I mean, as far as technically speaking, I'm going to give people strong first sentences. I'm going to give them solid chapters. Like each chapter is usually kind of its own story. Chapter endings are going to be engaging, and they're going to make you want to read the next chapter. There's a lot that I don't know if readers have these expectations, but I have these expectations because I think they're good craft. And I think they align with a lot of reader expectations. As far as the story, though, and what people would want to see, it's the story I really wanted to tell. It's a world that nobody else was writing because people were writing either Norse inspired, which was not really Norse myths, or they were writing historical fiction, which had very few or no fantasy elements, or something else. So when I was creating this, it's always been the thing I really wanted to read myself. And that was part of the passion, but and confirmed by Mike Sullivan's advice. It was nice to hear that encouragement. Like, yes, that's definitely the way to do this. So I think just as I craft it into a way that's easy for readers to consume, as the contents though, that's all me. I'm pretty sure people will like where I'm going. I don't think that I'm going to hurt anybody's feelings, but maybe a few character deaths. But
so I do have a question to follow up with there, but we have a new friend that showed up, another awesome author, Molly Macabre. How's it going?
nice.
I hope you're listening to book 3 of Red Rising, Molly. I need to talk to someone about that ending. So hope that's where you're going. And then Ted has another great question, because Ted is he wants to get into writing himself, and this is a question he's kind of struggling with.
Yeah.
Is on a scale of being a planner to a pantser, where would you fall?
Right now, I'm kind of in the middle, and if planning and pantsing are like, one side, it's one side each of like a Jacob's ladder. I'm like the guy who just keeps struggling on Jacob's ladder and like cannot move forward, but for some reason will not fall over. So I would like to plan out. It feels like that's just going to make my life easier. But every time I've done this, I run into massively diminishing returns. So much of the creative process happens when I'm in the midst of writing, and it changes things. It means I'm going to have to go back and be like, nope, this is a better idea. Do this. That's just the way it is. Again, I don't recommend doing anything the way I do it. It's just how I happen to do it, because I haven't found another way out. Now, I think I'm getting better at that. And I think that writing shorter books helps a lot. These books are fairly long, and I don't recommend that. So that's my main advice right now is conceive of shorter stories. You will be able to expand those a lot if you have interesting characters, protagonist or antagonist. Well, hopefully both. And then you can move on from there. But if you have too much, then it becomes really difficult to put everything together, and your outlines become disorganized, and you go off one way and realize you haven't touched this subplot that you wanted, and your writing becomes a little unfocused because you realize you just created a new thing, but it's not necessarily in line with the outline. I think the most important thing is to just write. And if you don't feel like writing, and you're like, I don't really know what I'm writing next, well, try to outline, and use a basic 3 or 4 act structure, or at least sketch out beginning and end. I have a beginning here. What's the beginning? Can I move the beginning actually a little later? Because a lot of writers start too early, and then they have 2 or 3 chapters of extraneous stuff, and it doesn't really move the story forward. See if you can move it forward. The end, though, I don't know. Stephen King gives the exact opposite of this advice, I think. And he's like, you just put people together and you let them interact. And I don't actually think Stephen King has great endings to his books, but maybe other people will disagree. I think a solid beginning and a solid end in mind are minimal things that I need for a story. Then I will try to imagine okay, so how do I get from point A to point D here? Because I can't just have a beginning and an end. It has a lot more than 2 chapters. If you're not making progress outlining, though, get to writing. Don't ever sit at a blank screen. And if you can't write and you can't outline, go read something. Go read something like you want to write.
I think that's solid advice. So that perfect transition. It's like you're reading my notes. So awesome that you have the camera up to see my notes here.
I'm not. I'm just very smart.
Reading my mind over here. So this is your final book. So anyone, this is
I
Greg's
hope
final
not.
book in his trilogy
Yes.
of Spear of the Gods. How do you personally define a satisfying ending?
Satisfying ending. Oh, wow. You really got me on this. You've got to answer the major questions of the story. I do not like stories that are like, oh, it's up to you to interpret. Like, no, it's really not. You're the storyteller. You need to tell the story, and the end is part of the story. So how does the story end? This doesn't necessarily mean you answer literally every question about every character and what happens to them in the next 50 years. But it does answer whatever of the broadest questions you brought up were. And if you view fantasy literature in particular as reflecting on reality, which it is, Terry Pratchett is absolutely right about that. We're talking about reality, just in fantasy settings. You need to answer whatever argument. You need to finish the argument in a way that's convincing, or you need to answer the question you've brought up in a way that shows the answer, not having the character just get up and give a speech about answering your question. I think the characters need to live that and show that to you. I am a big heroic fantasy guy. I know that term has specific connotations. I'm using it just like the words heroic and word fantasy. My parents read me Beowulf before I could read. So I mean, this is really deeply ingrained in me, and the heroism of it all is important. So I don't think you'll ever catch me writing what would be considered a grimdark story, whatever that is, because nobody has a definition for it. But you won't find me writing something that like, well, the world is just depressing and everyone's a terrible person. Like, no, you're going to find me kind of writing the opposite and showing you that I'm right with that story, in much more specific and much more interesting and engaging ways. But ultimately, they kind of will revolve around that.
Perfect. So I was thinking, with 2 books and your novellas out, have readers' responses ever surprised you, especially in the interpretations of your story, different than maybe what you intended the story to be? Have you received any of those surprises?
Not from the people who I think are the target readers. I submitted Burden to Bear for Spiffbo, the self-published fantasy blog off, and I knew it wasn't going anywhere as soon as it got assigned. So I'm like, oh, I'm familiar with these reviewers, and this book is just like not up their alley. And you could see that from the previews that one of them made. Definitely was not excited to read it. The other one was just like, did not rate it, left a review and wrote about it. It said, I'm not going to rate this. I think I just don't like Vikings. And it's like, yeah, that's fair. That's reasonable. I'm sorry it got assigned that way, but it is what it is. There was one review that said, like, I don't really like books where it's just about getting all the boys together. And I was like, well, that's not quite what it is, but it's like, this person would never pick up the book on her own. It was a bad assignment. It's kind of like, I hope that Spiffbo in the future is like, don't assign a romantasy book to somebody who's definitely not going to consider romantasy. Don't assign historical fantasy to somebody who's like not going to consider historical fantasy. So I don't think those reviews worry me at all. And I don't think anybody else has misinterpreted anything or taken the wrong sort um, of takeaway from it. I think that in general, people are really getting a lot of it, even for the deeper meanings, not just the surface stuff, because it's enjoyable. Just I think as a
Mm-hmm.
as a fun and fantasy action with some humor, but there's also a lot of stuff going on. It's not just mythology to use mythology. It's also mythology to make some mythology and to explain some mythology. And a lot of the people are very, like, the people who tend to read this stuff about Norse myths, they tend to be very into it. My readers tend to be very well read. So they're like, oh wow, you used this, and this, and like I wrote it so that I hoped if you've never read a Norse myth, then that will not slow you down.
Mm-hmm.
It will be fine. Um, but most people in this are just like, they're getting some of the more esoteric references. They really understand what's going on. They're right with me, and they love being engaged at this kind of level. So the audience largely self-selects for a lot of that. I don't know. I don't have that much exposure yet. Who knows, when I get, a couple hundred reviews, maybe some people will have a little bit different response, but I don't think so.
That's good. That's good. Hitting that target audience. So I want to switch to talking a little bit about the current avenue of fantasy now. I'm curious to hear your perspective. Is there any fantasy tropes that you wish would be done more often in fantasy?
Fantasy tropes more often. Oh, that is a tough one. I I'll tell you that the three fantasy tropes I think that I hit really hard in this series are found family,
Mm-hmm.
the fish out of water, and coming of age. And these are all, especially coming of age, very common, just very common. So I'm not sure if I would need more of that. I do think that coming of age, as far as what part of what I wanted to do was a coming of age story with a guy who didn't quite fit, and that is burden to bear. Is he is trying to fit into a role that he does not really belong in, but he wants to belong in, and he wants to belong at least well enough. And as he is not, super Viking warrior, which so many historical fiction novels kind of go at, he has a different road. It's not just learning the fighting skills and to be tough and all that. It's learning to be that way at all,
Mm-hmm.
and sideways to fill a need for that crew that doesn't necessarily involve fighting, that he can contribute in other ways. That actually makes him a much more interesting character to write, because his problem solving skills are much higher, and that gives much more creative endeavors to the plot. So I would like to see maybe more of the fish out of water, I think, because
Mm-hmm.
especially as it relates to you can't just fight your way out of this. I know I said that I conceived this after reading a whole bunch of Robert E. Howard's Sword and Sorcery, which is basically characters just fighting their way out of, and I love that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I've read enough of it. I want something that has an element of that, but has a little bit different too. Has a little bit of an addition to that. I do also would like to see more found family. Like I like that stuff. It gives me a good feeling. Nicholas Eames of the Band
Mm-hmm.
series. First one was Kings of the Wild.
Things of the wild. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Second one was Bloody Rose. We're still waiting on Outlaw Empire. I don't know when we're getting that. It's been a little bit of a while at this
Mm-hmm.
point. I liked Kings of the Wild a bit more, but that's just personal preference. Really strong found family sense there, though. These guys getting back to, it's like getting the band back together, but they're not a band really. They're they're more like a D&D party. with a whole bunch of rock and roll references.
Mm-hmm.
It leads to easier humor. It leads to easier or a lot of more emotional connection. And I think that stuff is great. It raises stakes. It's not like you don't have to have romance necessarily to have emotional connection to characters. And when you do, then the fighting scenes they matter a lot more because you care what happens to those characters. It's kind of like I want those characters to be developed, those relationships to be developed, then have a fighting scene, then give me higher stakes. It's one of the reasons why, I will not open a book or a story with a fighting scene, probably, or at least I can't think of an example that I would, because why does anybody care who wins yet?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been able to establish that, and that's something we've talked about in the writing group with Mike. An explicit advice that he's given. I found that, I've never actually attempted to do that, and that's probably why. I do want my main character to solve a problem first, but it can't be just a fight. Maybe at some time in the future, I will think of a way to do that with a fight scene, but right now it's not really on the books. So yeah, Fish Out of Water, Found Family are probably different takes on those and different ways of exploring those. Probably the tropes that I really like to see a little bit more of, if possible.
So Ted, I'm telling you, you need to
Nice.
read this. Just read the first one. Read Bird and the Bear. I promise you, going to enjoy it. It's right up. It'll be right up your alley, man.
Kickstarter selling all those books, Ted.
Right up your alley.
On that.
Right up your alley. And then I can't agree more, Ted. Yeah, I have to. Even if the characters are like morally gray and they're not good people, if I understand or care about their reasoning for what they're doing, I can get into a story. Give me one small thing to get me to understand their why, and I'm all invested.
Yeah.
And
so now that's an interesting term, though, morally gray characters, because I've seen that bandied about, and I really do think about a lot of these big issues in fantasy. Thanks. No, nice. Thank you, Ted. By the way, there are stretch goals coming that you're going to get more than you actually bought. Whoops, that's me dropping my microphone. That's getting a little too excited. Morally gray characters, because a lot of this stuff figures important. It's very important to fantasy literature, and it says something about the worlds that we build and the stories that we want to tell, and the realities that we live in. I'm not necessarily sure what a morally gray character is, just because, whose morals are we comparing this against? 2025 conventional live in the suburbs morals, because, killing anybody is pretty morally not even gray. But, you stick this into a medieval fantasy setting, you're very different. And if you go back in time, because my books are really, they're set in a time that's much earlier than your normal medieval fantasy setting. More closer to the migration era, even than the Viking Age. So things were hard. Do we give those morals a wide latitude? Do we look down on those morals? What I choose to do is I focus on some of the things that I think are positive characteristics, and try to show, some ideas that I'm really trying to get across is, I don't believe that we do this constant upward trend in like just getting better and better and better and better. We're so much better than we were in the past. We've learned all those lessons, and those people were just kind of like whatevers. Actually, I think a lot of those people had a lot of courage, for one thing, that is not in evidence in modern day. And so when I see, when you read about Wiglaf charging the dragon in Beowulf, that's a meaningful scene to me. Wiglaf does not charge that dragon because he thinks he can save King Beowulf. He states exactly why he's charging the dragon. He's doing that because he expects to die with his king. because he says to the other retainers who are there, like, who are not charging, they want to retreat. It's like, so you accepted the armor, you accepted the weapons, you accepted the responsibilities as well as the power. Like, that goes along with this. You don't have a choice. This is why you got the armor and the weapons, to charge that dragon. And they're like, yeah, but like, that's not very upwardly mobile of us. So if you look today and you see, like, as I did in an office environment where people were not only not willing to commit career suicide like Wiglaf, they were not even willing to avoid promotion if it meant doing something which is actually honorable. This was part of why I left the FBI, because in my opinion, and we took a lot of training on this, and I really believed it because, Wiglaf is close to my heart. It's like, you do the hard thing when it's time to do the hard thing. You've been entrusted with a lot of power. And I was seeing people like, this is slightly inconvenient for me, so I don't think I want to do that. And, well, during the different era, that would be considered so dishonorable, you would be better off dead. So what I write about is people who are like, yeah, we would rather be dead than that. They have a lot of qualities that aren't modern, but some of those qualities are admirable in the modern day, principally courage. So when we say morally gray, I'm just like, I don't really know what you mean. I mean, some of their morals are pretty strong to me. In fact, way stronger than today. They definitely wouldn't fit very well if you just put them into, modern day city, but that doesn't mean they're all bad either. I don't know if you have a take on that.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think I need to go through and really think through now of when I think of a character as morally gray, what do I mean by that? And I think that's something I need to go through and think about. So when I think about right now off the top of my head, and obviously I need to do more thinking with it, I'm thinking morally gray when I'm thinking of more grounded characters for that world, rather than people who always are going to do the perfect best thing. And that's what I kind of think about when I think of morally gray. Do they seem real? Do they make mistakes? Do they do the wrong thing? Do they might do something that I personally might not have done if I was in that situation? That's what I currently consider as morally gray characters, and not I'm the paladin of the group where I'm going to do the perfect thing every single time, which to me that's unrealistic. There's I'm sorry, people aren't going to do the perfect thing every single time, say the right thing every single time. Definitely in these fantasy stories where things are a little bit more elevated, like you mentioned, there's actual dragons flying around and people are nonstop in chaotic war with goblins, and thinking someone's going to be perfect is realistic. So that's kind of what I'm thinking from like a morally gray. When I say morally gray, and that's mostly the stories I read where you have grounded, real characters where it's like, this makes sense for the story and the world that it's in, not what it fits for modern times or the times when the book was written. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think character imperfections are crucial to a good story. Or else you do have this just like, well, this person is kind of going to go around and make all the right decisions because they read the script and they're going to make all the right decisions. That's just not exciting and it doesn't show as much struggle. I'd like to see a physical struggle. Sure. I like reading fighting scenes, like writing fighting scenes, but I also I want some intellectual struggle, some moral struggle, some tough decisions, some regrets. Think about how these characters would be real. And another thing that really we've talked about in Mike's writing group is he always wrote characters that he would like to hang out with. And I found like, oh yeah, I'm writing characters that I would like to hang out with. it's hard for me to conceive writing characters that I really wouldn't. But at the same time, some of these characters, or all these characters, they have their imperfections. They're not all just like going to tell you the right thing every single time. Part of that is what makes them interesting. And those, I think I can't remember what writing book I read this in, but what is the character's fatal flaw or fatal assumption? I think actually fatal assumption, if you can come up with it, is even more useful than the fatal flaw. And I'm not sure if I have a fatal assumption that Ansgar has that's not stated, but I think it's pretty clear. He has some fairly big flaws from early on. Easy to identify, he drinks too much. He can't hold his alcohol. Also, he doesn't know anything about how to deal with women. I mean, he's very immature on this. And that I don't allow the text to justify any particularly bad behavior. In fact, he calls out like, yeah, I was an idiot. But those are two of my big imperfections for that character moving forward. And it really, both of them kind of help drive the story towards the conclusion of the first book.
Mm-hmm. All right, I want to pivot back because you said my favorite trope. Fish out of water is hands down my favorite trope.
Nice.
I love that trope. Now I'm curious because I want to switch gears now. What's one trope you feel is overused in the fantasy genre? And I'll tell you mine first before you say yours. I dislike with a passion the farm boy trope. I don't like it. I do not. It is. I feel like it's way overdone. There's other things the character can do instead of actually being a farm boy. It pulls me out of the story. I sometimes I push through it and I'm like, I hear this is good. Let me get past it. But most of the time I drop the book.
It's not very creative unless you have some details about the farm or something about something. But it's almost like, well, I need a character who's just like an everyman. And so what does he do? He works on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I've never worked on a farm, but I'd be more interested if you at least gave me some details of the life. Incidentally, Ansgar was on a farm, but he was supposed to look after the sheep, and he just, his mind wandered and he let them wander off. So he was terrible at it. So he's kind of a farm boy, but I just don't lean into it much.
It didn't feel like that farm boy. Let me read a third of the book about the farm boy to the old mentor kind of thing. It's just like overdone for me personally.
I think that your answer leads into my answer, which might be the same answer with different words, because my answer is I cannot stand. I pretty much will just not read anything with a chosen one trope.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, the heroes aren't made because like, oh, I'm so special because I was just born that way. That's silly to me. The fantasy involves so much mentoring, like you just mentioned, the old mentor, often in magic, sometimes in fighting, maybe in some other kind of lore, but they have to go through this learning process. The thing is, I've done a lot of judo. I teach judo. I'm learning a little longsword now. I've learned a lot of writing styles and crafts, and I can tell you that if you want to learn the lore and get good at something, then you do it over and over again. Like that's the big secret. Is there's no secret. Just go to practice consistently and try and follow simple directions. You were so special because of who you were born, and like, oh, I don't even have to try hard at this. It's just like, okay, I know people like that. They're not good at this stuff. They're not good at martial arts. They're good at the beginning of a martial art when they're paired with other people who are just beginning, and they think like, aha, I can throw this person. It's like, you can throw this person because you have 30 pounds on him and you're very muscular. But once you get to brown belt, things change, and then people start sweeping your foot because you just relied on strength. Aldo Nadai was a famous Italian fencer in the early 20th century. And his book on fencing was really good. I read it in college because I fenced a little bit in college. People were playing with swords, and I was like, hell yeah, I want to play with swords. So what he wrote was about two fencers who came up in who he knew, and one was this guy who's just winning blinding fast, like winning every match, like crazy, hard to beat. And this other guy who just kept losing, would find himself with like taking a few touches, but then doing these different things and winning and losing like 5-2 or 5-3 almost every time. And then in like 10 years, in 10 years, the first guy realizes that he's got arthritis in his wrist and he can't lunge nearly as fast. And his speed is halfway gone. And so he can yell at students, but he's not really great for winning matches. The other guy, the guy who lost, the guy who just kept trying things and judging distance, nobody can pretty much touch this guy. People's blades will come, or points will come so close that they might brush the hair. Like if it was hair, that's the target area, not like a jacket or something. Like they would come within that distance. Or if it was a real blade, it would come and slice a few hairs off, or maybe even the top layer of skin, but it would go no further. And that leaves him in a position to counterattack, where he can just take you out, and he would just win every single time, because what he practiced was judgment, timing, learning. And you fail in doing this. And the chosen one trope short circuits all of everything we know about learning everything, especially martial arts, which I think are the closest analog to magic and fighting systems in fantasy books. And I'm like, it's just so dishonest to me and not believable. And also, why would I root for that person? Like,
I think Ted hit the nail on the head with this. It's overdone. And how can you relate to someone who just happens to be born when 3 stars were aligned and the red oak tree leaves became blue by the hollow moon? Just like woke up one day, it's like, I'm now the best of everything. So yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about a little while ago. We got to find characters that we can relate to. And yeah. I think you're right. We're talking about the same coin, just on different sides. Farm boy, farm boy, the chosen one trope that I'm just like, I'm done with these. And then, I need someone to struggle, and I need to see their struggle, then to learn from their struggle, and then make better decisions going forward. And then I'm like, okay, that's why they're the hero of the story, is because they're failing and learning, rather than just like, oh, I know how to fence because I woke up one day and grabbed a sword, and now I know how to do it because it's in my blood, and I'm the best fencer ever.
Exactly. And you said you listen to them struggle through, and you learn from their struggle. In my opinion, if an author succeeds at that, that is about the highest form of fantasy literature that fantasy literature can attain. Like that really is the goal. Like I said, we were talking about reality when we write fantasy. That's exactly what we would like to, or what I would like to do, what I think some of the best fantasy does, or to tell about our world and really express it. Tolkien wasn't using an analogy exactly when he wrote Lord of the Rings, not for like World War I, which he experienced, but he was using a lot of the lessons he learned in World War I. And as a result, Lord of the Rings it was and continues to be highly applicable today. And I think that's why it's so beloved. So I hope that we get more fiction that is exactly as you described. You see the character struggle and you learn from their struggle.
All right. I think it's time, Greg. I think it's time for some ridiculous questions.
I think I'm ready for this.
All right. So we'll start with the first one. Greg, you are hosting a dinner party, and you must invite 3 Norse gods. Who's the guest, and who do you not want to show up uninvited?
Okay. Last question first. Don't want Loki to show up uninvited because he'll probably kill my servants, like he did in that story. Who would I want there? Well, Odin is a good call, as long as you're not within like stabbing distance of that guy, because you cannot trust him. I mean, not that he was one for stabbing exactly, but watch out where that guy points his spear. Second, I think I would have to choose Freya, because I think she gets a bad rap. Not a bad rap, as far as like there's a bunch of stories about her doing bad things. I think she doesn't get enough detail in the stories. I think she is more responsible for more interesting stuff than we still have surviving in the existing manuscripts. And remember, she's the one who taught Odin Sather. So, there's a lot of wisdom there. And if Odin won't talk, without making you a bad deal, Freya will probably be a pretty good dinner guest. Also, not going to be hard on the eyes. Third guest. I'm going to have to mix that up a little bit. This is a tough one because, is Heimdall going to be too quiet? Is Thor just going to eat everything you own? I mean, the likelihood is yes to that answer, or to that question. I think that the next one that I would pick would be Uller. And that is because I would be like, what are the stories about you? Tell me all the stories. Like, how come there are no stories? I want to know. So between the three of them, I'm at least going to get something out of that, I think.
Awesome. I love it. I feel like that would be just chaotic. Ted, I see your question. I'm going to jump back to your question in just a second. I got one more ridiculous question that I need to go through and ask. If you could steal one literary character from another author and drop them into your story, who would it be, and what role would they play in your story?
Oh, man. I'm tempted to go with a character who isn't really so heroic at all. I'm tempted to go with Sandan Glokta from Joe Abercrombie's first series. I just think we get so much of his inner thought. He's an interesting guy. I say that. I'm not trying to say he is a good guy. I do think he tries to do as much good as he might in his position, but that is such a, especially once you finish the third book of that series. Again, try not to spoil anything. It doesn't really leave you with a lot of hope for humanity. So if you didn't think it was grimdark in 1 and 2, and I was just like, what's so grim and dark about this? It will be by the end of book 3. Glokta is one of the few characters who will legitimately outsmart everybody else. He doesn't really have any other choices. I mean, he can barely move, and he can't hardly move without pain. I'm not sure what role I would have him in, just because my stories are so complete. But I would certainly have him in an advisory role somewhere. I'm just not sure where that would be. Or you know what? Better answer. I think from Kings of the Wild, I would like Clay. I really appreciated his perspective telling that story. The kind of the forgotten band member as the pseudo bassist, but the bedrock of the music as the bassist, and also the bedrock of that group, because he kept things together. He was the guy who was always first to charge a threat or to cover his allies with his shield. He's a good dude, and I would put him just about anywhere. I think he'd fit very well onto the crew of the Sea Squirrel.
I was very surprised with your original answer. I think Clay would be amazing. I agree. Just stick Clay in there, he'll automatically fit in. But when you said Glock, I was like, man, I could like that is a great answer. That is a great answer. I think he would.
I don't know
I
what
think
he
he
would
would
do,
be
but
really good in a
yeah.
bunch of fantasy stories and just like be able to outsmart everyone. Have you only read the first trilogy? Have you read the second one?
I've only read the first trilogy. I'm not really a grimdark guy. I had some. I didn't like as much where the series went.
Mm-hmm.
I do think Abercrombie's a really interesting writer, especially of dialogue, and I think he had it. I do think he did a great use of dark humor in that series. So, no throwing shade on any of that. But I'm just not sure that that's kind of more of what I want. What excites me the most right now is this book has been sitting on my shelf for months. It is Dragonfired by J. Zachary Pike, and it is the third book of the. Oh gosh, I'm going to get this wrong. It's not Prophet, it's Prophet. Yeah, excuse me. I'm going to grab this book right now because I have to show you this book.
Okay. Yeah, I've not heard of it, so I'm putting it down. And then, Ted, we're going to get to your question next, buddy.
Okay. The Dark Prophet Saga. Prophet, not Prophet.
Oh, yes. I've read that first one. I've read the first one.
You've probably read, Orconomics.
Orconomics, yeah.
It is great. People talk about it and they classify it as like, oh, well, this is humorous fantasy. I'm like, well, it's actually a lot more than that because it's really the great characters and the great story that drive this. The fact that he writes humorously often does help drive certain situations, and it is a characteristic of his writing, but he does it so well that it's just a feature. It's not the main thing. He also clearly loves D&D. He clearly knows D&D. He's able to make fun of D&D. And these characters are also really quite memorable. So, when I gave you the first answer, it was just like, what's at the top of my head? It's like, but any of these characters I could think about inserting into a different series. Gorm Ingerson, the dwarf who leads this group, is definitely high on the list as well. But this is Dragonfired is the book that I'm most excited about reading, and Pike is definitely not in the grimdark vein. He is much more in the heroic fantasy vein.
Yeah, I've only read Orconomics. Now, it was a few years ago. I'm looking at his other work. I don't think I've read any of his other stuff. Yeah, I need to go back to that series. I remember enjoying it the first time I read it. So Ted had a good question. So we're going to go back real quick to tropes. So which trope do you feel is the hardest to write or subvert?
That's it. I mean, I'm not sure because when I write tropes, I'm not actually consciously writing the tropes. Like I only identified those 3 tropes in my writing by thinking about it for a while because I just wrote the story that I wanted to. I wasn't thinking like, how do I put this together? I think that at this point there might be the what would you call this? The magical school, or I think there's a different term for that. Dark academia. Could we call that a trope, or is that more like a?
I would consider that a trope, like the fantasy student kind of thing. Yeah.
So I have a little bit of that with Ansgar learning from a mentor, but it's not in a school, so it's definitely not academia, just because of the time period. But I think that just having that trope forces a whole bunch of structural stuff. You have to have a school. You have to have why are these people teaching? Like, are they charging tuition? Are they not charging tuition? What are they learning? Like, what are the limitations? What are the students getting up to? Can the students like zap people with lightning or fireballs? And if they can, how are you stopping that? You need to think about a whole bunch of different things. And so if you have the dark academia trope, I think that's really driving your entire series. And so just having it forces a whole bunch of structural and creative stuff. It's not really something that you can kind of like, oh, I ended up writing this. Like, oh, it turns out I'm just writing a fish out of water. I don't think you can just fall into that. So I think that would probably be harder to write, or at least would take a lot more explicit effort.
Good answer. Good answer. All right, Greg. We're off to the lightning round.
Okay.
I don't want you thinking. I just want your answer.
Impossible, but I'll try to keep answers short.
Perfect. Some of these are going to be good long ones, so we're good.
All right. Boy.
So, all right. Sword, staff, or axe?
Sword. I mean, but it depends.
Plot twist or slow burn?
Plot twist.
What's one book you wish you had written?
Lord of the Rings.
Most underrated myth or story from mythology?
Thor's trip to Utgard.
Okay. I don't know that story. We'll come back to that.
All
right. Favorite villain?
Odin.
Biggest distraction when writing?
Everything. I'm easily distracted. If there's a sound, then it distracts me. How about that? Sound. One
book you wish you could read again for the very first time?
A Wizard of Earthsea.
Okay. And then last one. I'll let you pick any of your books. You can do the whole series of just one book. I'll let you make that decision on your own. So if your book could have a theme song, what would it be?
Oh, boy. So first of all, I'm a big metal fan. So whatever this song is, it's going to be metal. And I don't think it would be, you say don't think about this, but I mean, I have to think about like what songs are, because I can't come up with everything off the top of my head. I suspect it would be a song by Amon Amarth, because they write songs about Vikings. And I think that it would be off of Deceiver of the Gods, because that was such a mythologically based album. And Coming of the Tide.
Coming of the Tide?
Yeah.
All right. I've not heard of that. I'm going to have to go through and listen to it.
That's and actually, I might have just screwed up and been on the wrong album there, but whatever. I'm going back to Coming of the Tide by Amon Amarth.
Okay, perfect.
Because I can't think of too many Iron Maiden songs for some reason right now. I didn't want to screw with you and say a Gwar song, because that would just be ridiculous.
So you said your favorite underrated myth is Thor's trip to Utgard. I've not heard of that. Do you want to give a quick synopsis of what that story's about?
Yeah. So Thor's trip to Utgard, it's kind of a longer one, and this one appears only in the prose Edda, I think, not necessarily the poetic Edda. So Thor and Loki are actually traveling together, and I don't know, I might be pretty long in tooth, so just let me know. Are we short on time at all, or can I? Okay. So there are a few parts to this story, and the first part is they meet up with some humans for the night. They're kind of at the edge of Midgard, and Thor's got these goats pulling a chariot, and feature of the goats, you can kill them and eat them, but then they will come back to life as long as you stick to the rules. So, these people, they're kind of like dirt farmers. They're pretty poor. They don't have anything. They have a couple of kids. And Thor's like, I have goats. So they cook the goat. He kills the goats. They cook the goats. And Thor says, all right, eat all the goat you want, but just put the bones on the skins. Don't crack them. Okay, for tomorrow. So one of the kids, there's two kids. There's the son and the daughter, and the son decides to crack open a leg bone and suck out the marrow because, like, why would we waste this? So Thor the next day takes the piles of bones on the two skins and he waves his hammer Mjolnir over them and he brings them back to life. But one of the goats is lame now because of the cracked bone, and Thor is pissed. And Thor being not only quick to anger, like, his rage is pretty scary, especially for tiny little people of Midgard. So he sees the fear in their eyes and he backs down, because the other feature of Thor is he will calm down as quickly as he gets angry. Mm-hmm. So the thrust of this is that in payment for the laming of the goat, the two kids need to come with him as his bondservants. So they're traveling into Jotunheim. They don't have a cart anymore. They're on foot, and they run into the giant, a literal giant, Skrymer. And I'm not pronouncing that very well, but I can't pronounce an Old Norse Y for the life of me. It's not easy. So they find this because they take shelter in a cave. They come out of the cave the next day after Thor gets no sleep because of these like earthquakes going on. And they see this wasn't a cave. This was this guy's mitten. And the earthquakes are just him snoring. So I'll cut this a little bit short because it's a longer tale. Thor gets kind of, or they talk to this giant. He's pretty friendly outwardly, except nothing he offers like works out. Like he offers his pouch, like, I'm going to bed early. You guys can have whatever food's in my pouch. And then nobody can untie the pouch no matter what, even Thor, the strongest god there is. So Thor gets increasingly pissed off and 3 times tries to kill this guy while he's sleeping. Because he's like, I can't deal with the snoring. I can't deal with this knot. I can't deal. So he's hammered down on the forehead every time. Skrymer is like, oh, did a fly land on my forehead? How are you, Thor? Why are you up so late? They eventually, he leaves them. He says, all right, I'm gonna leave you, but if you're gonna keep going on, go to Utgard. But like, hey, you need to have good manners. I'm gonna go off different direction. They get to Utgard, and these are all literal giants. Now, Jotnar aren't always giant, but in this case, they are. Skrymer is a giant. Jotun and everybody in Utgard is huge. So they get there, and the thing they need to do in order to get hospitality is they have to complete a feat. Now, almost everybody tries to complete a feat, and they all fail. They leave the daughter out, Ruskva. I don't know why. They allow the son to try to complete a feat himself by trying to win a race. But the girl, they're like, this is Old Norse, stories that definitely did not treat women as equal to men. Ruskva does not have the same kind of part to play. I might have a twist on that and fall into fury. So he fails. Loki fails in an eating contest. Thor tries 3 contests. One is a drinking contest where he's trying to drain a horn. One is he's trying to lift a cat off the ground, but it's like a giant cat and just keeps like doing this weird thing where one paw is on the ground. And the last one is wrestling, where he gets pitted against this old woman, and the king of Utgard is like, she takes care of the little kids. I guess they're about your size. And this old woman wrestles Thor down to one knee. And as hard as he fights back, he can't seem to get her. So the king of Utgard is like, okay, I mean, I think you were earnest in your attempts, but you're very small people. So we'll give you hospitality anyway. And as they do, they spend the night. He walks them out the next morning, and Utgard and the king, who has this weird name, but we won't get into that because that requires some kind of speculation itself. He's like, what do you think? And Thor's like, well, I think this sucks. I think I'm never going to live this down. I think you all think very little of me, and I'm going to be real embarrassed about this. And that's kind of how the tale is told. This is why I say it's underrated. It's told as this defeat for Thor because he was fooled. Is the king then reveals, hey, actually, if I knew what you were going to do in my hall, I never would have let you in. You know, I was Scrymer. I fooled you with a bunch of illusion magic. When you tried to drink out of the horn and drain that, and you dumped and you only got like 3 inches down, you were actually drinking the ocean, and you drained it several inches. When you tried to lift the cat was glamored. That's the Midgard serpent, the world serpent that's coiled around the world, and you still just about lifted him up. And when I pitted that old lady against you, that was old age. You were literally fighting old age, and it only forced you down to 1 knee. If I had any idea what you would have done, I would never have let you near my place. And I'm never going to let you near it again, because you're never going to find it. And it disappears, and Thor swings, and like there's nothing left there, and he's pissed off. So it's a story about, outwardly, about Thor getting fooled. Or as I saw someone retelling this to music recently, the humbling of Thor. And I say it's underrated because it shows no such thing. Thor supposedly lost, but did he? He was willing to just keep challenging, doing challenge after challenge, which were completely impossible. And he was undaunted in what he was attempting. And then, you know, he says outright, like, I guess I'm just going to have to live this down. Like, this is going to be really embarrassing. It's like, it's almost like, you know, as close to Old Norse stories will get to acknowledging vulnerability. And then he's pissed off. But, you know, it's not Thor who fled and said, I'm going to hide from you forever now. It's the king of Utgard who's like, I'm getting out of here. Like, you will never see me again. So I don't think it's the humbling of Thor. I think it is the tenacity of Thor and the willingness of Thor to keep trying no matter what, which is part and parcel of the mindset of that time and is a constant theme in those stories. So if it gets told as like, oh, Thor messed up, Thor lost this one, I think they're wrong. I think they're not right.
That sounds amazing. I'm gonna have to go through and read that. That sounds very, very cool. Very cool story. Now, I've not heard of that at all. The one part about him drinking the ocean, that sounds very familiar. Like, I feel like I've heard that before, but wrestling with time, I don't feel like I've heard that before. Yeah. So interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go through and look those up and read those. I have a few more questions if that's good for you. A few more questions for you.
I'm good.
Good. All right,
Yeah.
cool. All right. What's been the most meaningful reader's response you've received for any of your stories?
I can think of 3 that were really important. And the 2 of them were from scholars, top scholars, who I just have the utmost respect for in Dr. Caroline Larrington and Dr. Tom Shippey. Caroline Larrington, who wrote the translation of the Poetic Edda that I use the most. And Tom Shippey, noted Tolkien scholar, Lord of the Rings scholar, writer of J.R.R. Tolkien, author of the century, really engaging writer, just on so many things. A more recent book by him is Laughing Shall I Die? the lives and deaths of the great Vikings, which really gets at mindset. If you want to read about Viking psychology, as it's evidenced in those in the text that we have, then go for that. He's so accessible. He's so insightful. They're both of them are so engaging and so willing to engage on modern culture too. You know, they want, like, Caroline Larrington writes a bunch about Game of Thrones. Tom Shippey was consultant on Rings of Power for a while, at least. I think if they kept him on, that show would be a bit better. But these are two of the scholars who know more than anybody else on their topics, and they both like my books. So those were good. And another reader wrote a thing on Goodreads that really got me, and that was this is not young adult, but I would gladly give this to my sons. And that was very meaningful.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. So, success. I'm curious to hear, what does success look like for you as an author now, and then thinking maybe long term, would success be different for you long term in your career?
So I'm happy with what I'm doing professionally, although I need to get my output as number of books up per year. But you know, for me, success actually is tied to, because I'm very confident of what I'm doing. Success for me is the ability to continue doing it. So I need to earn enough money that I can continue to do this. The reality is, for most independent writers, that it cannot be a self-sustaining job by itself. Most independent writers have another job. I left my job, and I could go back to doing something else. I could go to freelance writing. I would like to just keep on writing fiction full time. But success for me would be that I would finally start making enough income that I wouldn't have to do that I could just keep focusing on fiction. And that's really the long-term goal as well. So beyond making enough money that, you know, I can pay bills, like this is legitimately my income, I'd like to make enough money that I can feel free with my time. Like right now, I do not feel free with my time. I am working every day, and it is a bit of a grind as I finish this up. But you know, I've had like 3 speaking things. I had the Kickstarter coming out, which is a lot of work to produce, and I have revisions of Fallen to Fury. Long term, it would be great if I could be mostly writing, doing a little bit of engagement without having to make marketing a full-time thing, and then being able to be generous with my time as far as if I think that I have something to teach, I would love to teach. I would not do that right now. I am still certainly in the learning mode. I could tell you, a little bit about Kickstarter. I could tell you a little bit about writing books, but I consider people who teach about writing, they really need to have done this for a long time, and remember how it was when it was hard as well. So if I could do that a little bit and not have to grind too hard on everything else, and still have an output of 2, maybe 3 books a year, maybe even 4 books a year. I don't know what a good pace is for me yet, but 1 a year is definitely not fast enough. If I get there, then that would be a long-term great place to be in, I think.
Awesome. All right. Is there a question you wish interviewers would ask you but never do?
Yeah. Yes. Why do you have Rolf Crocky in the wrong century? Which is kind of an esoteric question to ask, and like, why would you ask that?
Okay. Any upcoming projects you want to go through and tease outside of the, your current Kickstarter?
I will tease a little bit, but I don't know what's necessarily coming next. I have a couple of ideas. One is for a longer series, and it is not a continuation of the current series. It is a very different idea. Um, it is still it still has to do with that northern thing. I'm not sure if I can ever quite get away from that northern thing because there's so much, there's so many stories and old school kind of tropes um, that are bound up with that. Um, yeah, check those books out. I just saw that comment. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I'd like to move the time frame, the technology, the culture, all that forward, and to be into a more classically medieval fantasy kind of setting where I have a little bit more technology. There's some writing technology. There's a little bit more diversity in weapons and armor. There's a little more diversity in races, but I still want to keep this northern theme. And the idea that I've been toying with is this what I call the undergrounders, where you have humans, you have elves as kind of the overlords, but the underground races, the races that stay mostly underground or have lived underground, dwarves, gnomes, and goblins, they are kind of looked down on, as are the humans, in fact. But the humans actually just want to ape the elves. They don't really see quite the, don't really have the insight that maybe one would like them to have. And I'm following right now. What I have is really great characters: a dwarf, a gnome, and an elf. And they eventually they get together pretty early on, and the core story element is their adventures together and what they're trying to do overall. And I don't want to say too much more about that specifically, but I will say a little bit more about the world. And this is a world where some of the gods might sound somewhat familiar, but as if they're being half remembered through stories that have been told too often and stories that have changed, and maybe stories that the elves had a little hand in wanting to make sound not so appealing. So maybe you have gods that are kind of shadows of their former selves. If you want to recognize a few, maybe you have a few new gods based on a few cultural things that aren't explicitly northern, but add a few elements that I think are really important. I think that you might have some magic that really calls back to being done through poetry, like explicitly. This is how you cast a spell: is you use poetic verse. Like I know that's in Spear of the Gods, but it is not the only sort of way. Magic is mysterious in Spear of the Gods, as it was for the Viking Age and still is to us largely. In this case, it would be kind of a rediscovery and like, why does it work this way? And what else is there maybe? And it gives me a chance to to own my intellectual property in a way that and play with the intellectual property in ways where I can make whatever changes I want, and I don't have to think about, this really isn't how they thought of it way back then. It was like, well, I'm not doing that. And this is like kind of if the world ends in the early 500s with that years-long winter that actually happened, and then we just have a very different development of society from that point forward. And now we're like almost 1,000 years later. Like, where are we at? What has happened? A lot happens in 1,000 years. That's one. Another series I'm toying with right now, I have a little less developed, but I'm thinking about going back in time for this one. And this would be, I think this would be my own creation, but it's going to play heavily, or it's going to be influenced heavily by the late stage Roman Empire, specifically up near Hadrian's Wall. And what happens when after that falls. The interesting part is like everybody knows it's going to fall because everybody knows it's really unstable, but nobody wants to believe it. Nobody wants to say it out loud. So they keep pretending like this is fine. And some people are like, this is not fine. Up near Hadrian's Wall, I think you have a lot of interesting things going on. I do love those kind of liminal spaces. I love those wild spaces, those deep forests. You're not sure exactly what's going on. You're not exactly sure who's in power or who you'll run into or what kind of supernatural things you'll run into. I also, I'm very interested in the Picts, and we don't know hardly anything about the Picts. So, and I imagine that I'm just going to have to start inventing if I want something up there. But then what's the culture clash? Is it straight from people from, this pseudo-Roman Empire and the kind of Celtic people to the north of the wall? Any other things in play? And the last thing I'll say about that is I've been walking dogs a lot. I've been volunteering walking dogs, and that's research. So there might be a dog involved, if that's of interest.
Those sound awesome. I like the different way that you're thinking for these stories, because they sound something that we're familiar with, but that's not done in the same way. So I think that's going to be cool. I'm excited to go through and see what comes out from it. But we are about an hour and 45 minutes. So we can't finish this conversation without you talking a little bit about how people can go through and follow your work, support your Kickstarter. So let's go through, and how can people go through and support you, Greg?
Boom. Okay. So I believe there's a link down below to the Kickstarter directly. Mm-hmm. You can grab all 3 novels if you don't have any yet, in paperback or hardback, or just ebook if you want. If you buy all the paperbacks and all the hardbacks, all the print copies come with ebooks. There are some other extras like signed bookmarks and some stretch goals that come. Like we just released. There will be a new story. There will be a free story exclusive to Kickstarter backers, and that will be a new myth written by me, tentatively titled, because I wasn't feeling very creative, so I just titled it "How the Brisingamen Came to Midgard." So Freya's magic torque that she gets from the dwarves, how did that get to Midgard? That is going to be that story. If you're inclined toward Kickstarter, that is great. That is the best way to support me right now. If you want to just jump on my newsletter, that is another great way to get involved. And you get a free story with that too. You get a free copy of Trollsbane on ebook. Mm-hmm. And you just go to my website and there's a sign up form right there. So I think those are the 2 main ways right now. I'm also a widely published author, so all my ebooks, they're available everywhere right now: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Google Books. Does anybody use Google Books? I was told people did, but I'm not sure they do. We'll see. But hey, if you're a Google Book reader, shout it out. Let me know.
I feel judged because I do read some books on Google Books. I do read most of mine's not on Google Books, but when I first started reading, that's where I was buying all my books from. So I have like 25-ish books on Google Books. So I have those still. I don't really read anything current, but I do have those. So thank you so much, Greg. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fantastic conversation. I have all the links to your website, your Kickstarter, the works, everything going to be in the description below. Please go through and check out Greg's work. I highly recommend checking out his newsletter. I'm part of the newsletter, and I can tell you from experience, he does not spam you, and it's actually good information that he puts in there. So if that's your hesitation, don't go through and hesitate. Jump on, get that free book. You will love it, and then jump on to the rest of his book. So, Greg, again, thank you so much for for joining me. And everyone, thank you for coming on. And I hope everyone has a good evening. I appreciate it.
Pleasure, Josh. Thank you.